Welcome back to Sky News at Sunrise, live from Westminster this morning. It's time to take a look through Monday's newspapers. Joining me, the economics commentator at the New Statesman, Grace Blakely, and Guido Fawkes reporter, Tom Harwood. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
Big 48 hours ahead. Brexit, of course, dominating all the front pages, as it has done for the past week or so. In fact, even longer. But let's start, Grace, with the Times. And MPs are going to be voting on a number of amendments tomorrow. And you've picked out Hilary Benn's amendment, which could prove crucial for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, so Hilary Benn is tabling this amendment, which is seeking to rule out no deal, May's deal, and give Parliament a final say on the deal. Of course, we still don't know whether or not the vote's going ahead. There's some speculation as to whether or not she's actually going to go through with it, because she's potentially facing the largest Commons defeat in a century and the biggest backbench rebellion ever, I think. So, yeah, if this does go ahead and Benn's amendment is one of the ones that is voted on, it's difficult to see what will come out of that, because Juncker, I think, has already said it's this deal, no deal, or no Brexit. So the likelihood of potentially another referendum or another general election, if that amendment does pass, is perhaps increased.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about Hilary Benn's amendment, Tom, is that it says no to Theresa May's deal, but it also says no to no deal. So you then think, well, actually, it could give the Prime Minister a get-out-of-jail-free card, because her defeat may not be as heavy as if it had gone to the full vote. But then where does that leave her?
It leaves her and Britain in an incredibly weakened position. If Hilary Benn's amendment passes, we take away our strongest negotiating card, and that is the threat, if you like, of no deal. The only way that you can plausibly negotiate a good deal for the country is if the EU believe that you're willing to walk away. If not, they're going to sell you a bad deal because you'll take something at any price. And so really this will undermine the interests of the UK in terms of negotiations, and it's going to probably, if it were to pass, we'd end up with a far less good deal than even the one that's currently on offer. And really this is sort of the intention of the amendment, to make any Brexit scenario look disastrous and therefore force us to remain. And I think it's deeply undemocratic. Might
it force the EU's hand, though, Grace? Because the EU have said we're not negotiating on the withdrawal agreement anymore. We'll negotiate on the future relationship, but not on this part of the deal. This deal is done. If Hilary Benn's amendment goes through, does that then force the EU back to the negotiating table?
It's hard to see, even if it did force the EU back to the negotiating table, which, there's very little that we could do to force the EU to negotiate if it didn't want to renegotiate. And this is the other thing, how do you rule out something not happening? If it does turn out that we cannot negotiate a good deal and Theresa May can't go back and find something that's going to appease all the various interest groups she's attempting to appease, and there's nothing that comes out that allows us to put a deal forward. It's hard to see how we would move forward from that situation. I mean, again,
impossible task, trying to please all of the invested parties.
Yes, we've known from the very beginning that as soon as Theresa May attempted to kind of pursue this route where she was appeasing the right of her party, and also kind of attempting to, get enough of a majority to get this through the House of Commons whilst relying on support from the DUP, that it was just never going to happen. From the very beginning, she tried to fudge the issue by not really going for either side, and it's blown up in her face.
Well, if it's an impossible task and she can't do it, Tom, who can? The iFront page is exploring those lining up to take over from her should she lose her job.
That's right. There's been a lot of jostling in the last couple of days. Lots of big beasts appearing out on the TV screens yesterday, sort of setting out their positions, their stakes, how they're going to, how they would do things differently if they were in charge. Notably, Boris Johnson came out on Andrew Marr on the Marr programme yesterday morning, and put forward these ideas that actually quite a lot in the withdrawal agreement is acceptable to Brexiteers. It's quite good stuff on citizens' rights, that sort of area. But the fundamental problem is the backstop. And Boris's suggestion is that you withhold half of the 40 or so billion pounds that we said would hand over to the EU, and we wouldn't give it to them until we've agreed the future relationship, thereby giving us back some more leverage in that second part of the negotiations, but also that we'd bin the backstop and just take a tougher line with the EU. What we've seen over the last 2 years is that Theresa May has been not as tough with the EU as you might have done. They haven't believed her in terms of her slogan that no deal is better than a bad deal. It's never been one that the EU have bought into.
Those that say bin the backstop, what's the alternative?
Well, the alternative is that you deal with trade negotiations in the trade negotiation section of the of leaving the EU. The EU, from the start, set this whole negotiation out into two sections. Firstly, the withdrawal, and secondly, the future relationship. And so the idea then is that you deal with our relationship between between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland in the trade part of the talks. And that seems to be the consistent way to go about this. Because when you're dealing with trade, the only way that you're going to solve the Northern Ireland border issue is through a comprehensive free trade agreement. And
that's going to be negotiated after the withdrawal agreement's agreed. The backstop, as the Prime Minister keeps telling us, Grace, is an insurance policy.
Yeah, I mean, and again, there's a lot of stuff come out. A lot of Brexiteers are extremely unhappy about the idea that, the backstop could end up being permanent. This does, again, seem like another fudge, kicking the can down the road. What is going to happen in the UK's future relationship with the Republic of Ireland? Are we going to have, continued customs union? Are we going to have a border in the Irish Sea of some kind? These are all incredibly big issues. And, the fudge that we're seeing in the withdrawal agreement is simply not going to cut it.
But here's the thing about the backstop. We keep being told by the government that the EU finds the backstop incredibly uncomfortable. Parliament, almost every speech in the debate over the last few days in Parliament have been saying we find this deal broadly acceptable apart from the backstop. And obviously the Brexiteers and the European Research Group within the Conservative Party find the backstop as unacceptable as well. So you have almost agreement from all of the parties that the backstop's awful.
Alternative.
Well, yeah.
Well, no,
if you have a border between a UK away from the EU and an EU country, how do you have trade?
The alternative is a deep, comprehensive, mutual recognition-based free trade agreement. And you can secure that through negotiations, of course. But the thing is, from all sides, they agree that this is where we should end up. And really, we should be playing a stronger hand, driving a harder bargain. Everyone from all sides has said, the Irish have said they're not going to construct a hard border. We're not going to construct a hard border. Jean-Claude Juncker has said they're not going to come in and construct a hard border. It's a pretend threat.
OK, away from the backstop, it always comes back to the backstop, doesn't it? Any of those Tories that appeared on television yesterday appear to you as likely contenders for a leader should Theresa May have to go?
It's not a pretty situation, is it? There was some coverage today in some of the papers saying, I think it was Sajid Javid is the least unpopular of all the different candidates, which will give you some sort of idea about who we're choosing between. I think, there's some problems as well around the way that the leadership contest would work, because two MPs would obviously go to Conservative members and be voted on. And the problem is that lots of Conservative MPs have a real issue with the idea of Boris Johnson becoming their leader, but he's very popular amongst the base. So we could end up with a scenario, with a similar sort of scenario to what we saw perhaps in Labour a couple of years ago, when the PLP was not particularly happy with the idea of Jeremy Corbyn, but the membership was taking place in the Conservative Party.
OK, let's talk about another leader under pressure, Emmanuel Macron. The scenes in Paris over the weekend, Tom. You've chosen, oh no, Grace, actually, this is your story, in The Guardian.
Yes. So pressure on Macron grows after latest wave of violence. This story, there's been a lot of speculation as to who the Gilets Jaunes are, what their demands are, and kind of what their agenda is. And I think, what's happening in France builds on some of the economic turmoil that we've seen in most kind of developed countries since the crash. You've got really strong rises in the cost of living in the context of relatively low wages, and people are kind of really resisting Macron's agenda, which has essentially been he's removed this wealth tax, just as another prominent French economist, Thomas Piketty, is advocating for an EU-wide wealth tax, and he's attempting to kind of shift the costs of climate change onto the poorest in France. And rightly so, people are kind of resisting that and saying, we need a fairer economy that works in the interests of everyone rather than just the privileged few.
Tom, you've chosen another story in The Guardian. Right-wing marchers outnumbered by anti-racists.
Yes, what we've seen over the last few weeks is a mass exodus of all the household names from within UKIP. leaving the party. Everyone from Nigel Farage to Suzanne Evans to Patrick O'Flynn, all of these big beasts from within UKIP have abandoned the party because their new leader, Gerard Batten, seems to have a massive crush on Tommy Robinson. And he's turned it almost into a big Tommy Robinson fan club. And they had a curious demonstration in Westminster and down Whitehall just yesterday called the Save Brexit Rally. But they didn't really talk about Brexit all that much. They were talking mostly about Muslims, which seems to be Tommy Robinson's obsession and Gerard Batten's obsession. And about 3,000 people turned out for Tommy Robinson. But interestingly, far, far more people turned out to demonstrate against that. And within that counter-demonstration, you saw both people from Remain and Leave standing against what UKIP is becoming, this sort of new BNP-light, EDL-type organisation. And it's incredible, really, when you have Brexiteers so unhappy with Theresa May's proposed deal that UKIP are still languishing at about 4% in the polls. And it's because what they have done is totally abandoned any sense of credibility, pursuing this quite nasty streak in politics.
OK, let's lighten the mood a bit, shall we, and talk about Christmas. Are you sending your pets a Christmas card this year?
I don't have a pet. Do you?
I don't, I'm afraid.
So this story just completely baffles me.
My sister has a pet, and I won't be sending him a Christmas card. In fact, she won't be sending him a Christmas card. But apparently,
She's not one
in 10 people send their pets Christmas cards.
It's baffling. I can't possibly understand it. I mean, I know people really do love their pets and they're very,
They've obviously got very talented pets that can read.
Well, yeah, I mean, but surely it's, it's like a presentational thing. You get people to come round and you're like, oh,
Is it just these are people with not very many friends and they want more cards up on the mantelpiece? And it's a way to artificially extend
My Nan always used to sign her Christmas card, Love Nan, Lucy, who was her Yorkshire Terrier, and Cat. She had a cat. Called the cat with a K. Yeah,
with a K. Like in Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Yes.
That's amazing.
So there you go. She always used to sign from the pets, but she never actually wrote Christmas cards to the pet. Not that I know of. Let's talk about... I saw this in the papers yesterday, actually, and all the papers have picked up on it today. The shrinking chocolates. Now, chocolates shrink in my house every Christmas because we're eating them, but apparently they're shrinking before we even get our hands on them.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen this over the last year or so with energy drinks. They've all changed their recipes and become, tasting horrid, and now chocolates are becoming smaller and smaller for the same price. We're being utterly ripped off by these companies who are giving us less chocolate. And at Christmas, it's the time to overindulge, not to restrict the amount of chocolate that we should be eating. So it's a deeply sad story.
In my house, we've already opened a tin of Christmas chocolates. You know the round tins I mean. I won't tell you what particular brand, but it's already gone. It was gone within a day.
That's impressive.
Yeah, well, that's because they've got smaller. There weren't enough there to eat. That's what it was.
Toblerones.
No.
So Toblerones, they sort of took out one of every triangle.
Oh, I did see this.
And it just doesn't look like a Toblerone anymore. We're totally losing everything that was great about Great British Sweets.
Well, as we try to, reduce obesity levels, maybe they're doing us a favour by reducing the size of the sweets.
I think we should just exercise more. You don't have to.
Are you going to go out for a run over Christmas?
Well, I
know people that run on Christmas Day to work off all the
bizarre.
chocolate. And
my family tend to go and have a dip in Cromer in the sea on the day after Boxing Day. It's a bit of a tradition, yeah. Freezing, and we don't stay in there for long.
No, I bet. Just dip your toe in.
Dip,
OK,
yeah.
Tom, brave family. Tom, Grace, thank you very much. We'll see you in the next hour for more stories from inside today's papers. Brr, couldn't think of having a dip in the Cromer this morning. It is very cold. In fact, the front page of one of the tabloids today says that Britain is going to be freezing. Is that a bit dramatic? Let's have a look at our weather forecast.